Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our climate change discussions. How you doing today, brother? Good?
Oh, pretty good. As much as can be expected. I'm doing all right.
With today's situation, it's hard. Yeah. So anyway, we have a great topic today. We've long talked about sustainability and such. We promised people we talk about that in the future, and so now we're going to do it today. So from a user consumer perspective, people like me and you, we don't own any businesses or anything, but we buy stuff, we invest in stuff. We're regular people. How do people like us, we want to make a change, we want to make a difference, we want to support good companies that have good policies, maybe green policies. I mean, there's a way to do that. And I think that's through sustainability reporting. People can look that up and say, oh, that's a neat company to support, right? And so that's kind of what maybe a little bit as a benefit, and gives power back to the people a little bit to have this ability. And then is that kind of a good benefit of the sustainability reporting?
Yeah, I think it's like we were saying. I think it's something for like customers or investors, in that company, people that are interested in it. I think it's a good way for them to find out what the company's doing. If they're being good for the environment, or if they're doing the right economic practices. If they're doing the right thing socially for their workers and society and all that. So
it's a way for the people to be informed. It's a transparency thing where you can, because if that's important to you, how do you know which companies are practicing these good practices? And so there's a way to find out. And so why don't you explain to us what exactly a sustainability report is and what it means, or how it works?
Well, a sustainability report is a document that's published by a company every year. It's on a yearly basis, and it's usually put on a website that they have. And it covers topics such as the environment, the economics of the company, and then the social performance that they have.
That's good.
And so
it's beyond environmental. It's not just environmental. It has other stuff to it, right?
So, it has other things to it and all that. And so those aspects are actually driven by the stakeholders and the employees of the company. And they determine what aspects have priority based on what they call a materiality assessment. And so what that involves is that they send out surveys to the stakeholders, and then they give priority to certain things like in those environmental and social and economic issues. And then they make a map of it. You'll have the map where the y-axis is the importance to the stakeholders, and then the x-axis is the importance to the business itself. And so the issues that are the most important will be on the far upper right-hand corner, and the ones that are less important will be on the ones on the lower left corner. Certain companies that aren't really manufacturing companies, they're more, they're more service companies. Most of the issues will be more social in nature, and they'll be more importance towards that upper right corner, whereas the ones that aren't, the environmental issues will be lesser for the other ones.
Okay, so it's sort of a matrix you can look at and see where the companies fall in this graph type thing, right?
The sustainability reporting came about around 1997 because it happened from a group called the Global Reporting Initiatives Group. And in 1997, they made all of these policies and procedures and protocols, and they basically made up the framework of how a sustainability report should be written. And so there's like 4 categories. There's like a universal standards, which are the governance part could be part of it, and then you have the economic standards, which are the 200 ones, and then the environmental ones are 300, and then the social are 400 ones. So for example, for the economic ones, you have economic performance, taxes, anti-corruption, anti-competitive behaviors, market presence, and procurement procedures. The environmental would be energy, water, and effluents, emissions, materials, waste, biodiversity, and environmental compliance.
Very good. I mean, it's a powerful tool for the consumer, I think, so they can look into these things and be informed. So the consumer, though, has to take the time to look into this and do their own research and use this as part of their research. And so that's on them to make use of the information that's out there as well. So
yeah.
If they don't know it's there, though, they can't. So that's what we're trying to also inform people on. But
well, sometimes companies do like what's called a corporate social responsibility report, which is similar to a sustainability report, but it's more weighted towards the social aspect of it. So they're kind of more interested in their social performance, what things they're doing, what good acts they're doing for the society and for their workforce. And so a lot of companies, like I said, that aren't more manufacturing based, but they'll prefer to do like a corporate social responsibility report.
Good, very good. That's great. I think it's a good tool. So there's a corporate one and there's just a regular sustainability report, and they differ a little bit, but the corporate one just adds more social aspects to the report. Okay. All right, so that's good for people to know. So it's not just environmental. These are wide encompassing categories that go beyond environmental issues, but they're also issues that most people are concerned about today as well. They want to be able to make sure they treat their employees, correctly, that they don't have any problems, breaking any laws overseas, when they're importing, so whatever. There's a lot of responsibility on the companies to have good practices in general, not just environmental practices, right?
Yeah. So, you have equal rights and opportunity for like your employees. You want to make sure they have a good work environment. So a lot of times these companies can come up with good work, social programs or support groups for those employees. And the goal is to kind of make it more like a family environment. So I think that these sustainability reports, and we'll talk about maybe what ESG is doing too a little bit later, but those things are very good for society in general to know what companies are treating their employees good, and the community in general as well. So a lot of companies are putting a lot of investments in that, and we should reward those companies for doing those kind of things.
Yes, exactly. And so, well, you mentioned ESG. Let's talk a little bit about that, if that's all right. So
yeah.
So ESG, people have probably heard that term being thrown around a bit lately, but it stands for, it's very similar to sustainability report, but it stands for environmental, social, and governance.
Right.
And so the economic thing is not necessarily in there as much, but it's a similar reporting. And you're saying the sustainability report started in 1997. ESG started around 2004, and it was actually implemented by Kofi Annan from the United Nations General Secretary at the time. And he partnered he probably saw the sustainability report and he goes, I can kind of maybe use this and maybe expand it a little bit and maybe use it more for some social practices, maybe correct some social injustices more that are around the world. And so, I mean, if you remember at that time that, and going on for a while, there was a lot of protests by sports teams and things that, for social injustices, maybe in Africa or something like that. And so there was a lot of that going on. And so to roll with that trend, I think he wanted to add more governance and social aspects into the program as well as the environmental part. So he partnered with it's interesting, the Swiss government of all places, and then also this group called the International Financial Corporation, and it got 50 or so CEOs of companies around the world, and they came up with this similar matrix, like the sustainability reporting. But the difference about it is what it sounds to me like is that the sustainability report does a matrix and kind of distills everything down that way. He kind of listed some examples in the sustainability report. They're very similar. Like for instance, under environmental criteria, you might expect there to be a lot of things about that, but it's about renewable resources, energy consumption, energy efficiencies, water usage, waste management, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that in there. But in the like for instance, the social one, they have employee welfare. They talk about relationships with their stakeholders and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's good, and diversity in the workforce. And then with the governance part, they'll do sort of accounting and finance thing. But there's also supply chain stuff. There's also environmental stuff within the governance as well. How are the management team implementing ESG standards? How are they working on life cycle analysis and things like those? Those are also related to the environmental part too. So there's a little bit of environmental spread throughout it. So I think it's a little bit weighted towards the environment as environmental stuff as well. So it's not so necessarily economic weighted, where they talk necessarily about the economics of the company and maybe its profitability and its efficiencies and best practices in the way of how they're going to be successful in the business arena. Okay, this is not as really less to do with that, and so it's going to be incumbent upon the user to go and look elsewhere for that type of information. So implementing all these practices are good, but there for the bottom line, it may be kind of difficult.
So there's ESG rating companies. So they basically get the information from the companies that do their sustainability reporting, and they use that information and they input it into proprietary software that they have. And there's usually about at least 400 different kinds of data points that they can use, and they categorize it 150 or so. So they do the scores based on their criteria, and that a lot of that has to do, or they evenly split up the environmental, social, and governance portions for about a third of each one into about 10 total different categories, or 3 or 4 for each one. And one of the things with the ESG reporting too is they have controversial categories where it's heavily weighted. So if there's anything that the company may be doing unethically, it'll show up in the report. So for example, if you're doing tax or consumer fraud, that would show up. If you're violating human rights, things like that, worker rights, privacy, and diversity type of things, or environmental compliance, you're not doing, then those things can go against you in the reporting. So,
well, I mean, let's talk about the good. I mean, I think it's good too. I mean, it's in a free market society where you as a consumer investor want to invest in responsible entities and encourage them to succeed. I mean, this is a good way to do it. I mean, for both sustainability and for ESG. So voluntarily, they can put that out there, and they can say, hey, if people that want to invest more in green energy companies can do that. And they've shown since around now 2013 or so that the companies that are putting out these reports and ESG reports that people can easily find, they were starting to do better since 2013. So they say. I don't know where they get the data from, but supposedly those companies are because of the investment that goes on. The more you invest in a company, the more it's worth, right? So their stock value goes up, and so these have been happening with companies that are a little bit more greener than they have been with companies that aren't practicing good ESG standards. So it's an encouragement tool. It's a way to if people want that, they should be able to go out and find that out and do that. And it's funny because there's also a standard you can also buy into, and that's called DRILL, DRLL. It's a way to say, well, I want to invest in companies that are using petroleum non-renewable resources as well, and so it's on both sides. So it's sort of a way for people to, if that's what they want, they can go and invest in that too. So it's a free society, it's a free marketplace, and I think that's a good thing. So ESG is very, very popular right now with many companies.
Yeah, one of the things that it does is that it's used by asset managers, maybe at banks or different institutions, and so what they want to do for the investors, they want to make it more. They want to decarbonize their portfolio, so they're setting up a lot of these green funds for these investors, and so they'll consist of companies for like investments for like pension funds, 401ks, mutual funds, and they can probably use these ESG scores to kind of see what companies are beneficial, that are good, and they can be put in these kind of funds. And around 2020, they kind of estimated that there's about $1 trillion in these kind of investments on 2021, and it rapidly increased to $2 trillion the next year, like in the first part of the next year. And they're saying it'll probably get to around $50 trillion by 2025.
Wow.
These green funds and stuff from that,
Right. So I think I was reading that 70% of the millennial generation that do invest, they invest with a mindset of investing in green type companies, and so that's you're talking about an emerging market that's what they want to invest in, and so it behooves a company to play ball in this arena, right? So
yeah.
So good point about the mutual funds and things.
You can be maybe determined to be a green company if you're putting out a product that's environmentally beneficial for the environment. But a lot of times it's a way companies could take advantage of it so that they're misleading the public about that they're actually green or not. Maybe they could use the information that they input into the ESG reporting so that they're reporting on things that are more beneficial for them instead of things that go against them. There was a company that I can't remember their name, but they're a clothing company, and so they kind of now advertise that that their clothing line is very green, beneficial for the eco-friendly. Whereas now they're facing a lawsuit where they said, well, you're not really that way because you use too much water and wastewater in your clothing line and stuff like that. So they're starting to face a lawsuit with that. So a lot of people, that those are kind of things that could happen with it, with the ESG scores.
So there are some aspects that aren't so good, maybe about it, and we should probably talk about those a little bit as well, because in general, I think it's a good thing, especially adding, because you want the workforce to be protected. You want to make sure they're responsible in all aspects of their business dealings, and not ripping people off and following all the environmental EPA laws, things like that. You want that to be done, and so it needs to be a little bit more broad than just the environmental part of it. But so I think that's a good thing. But there are some drawbacks to it a little bit. So let's just so you were just mentioning that maybe it can be misleading a little bit. People can, when you're talking about this way they were this clothing company, right? So so in a sense that kind of leads to a point where if you distill it down into just a number, it could be very misleading on, hey, I got to get my ESG score up high, so you're doing all these things to get it up high, but maybe there's some things that an investor is really concerned about that may be a big problem area, but they're not highlighted in just a number. And so it's hard to really kind of dig down deep into it unless you get into the report. But it's not so easy, I find, to find these reports for companies like you would a sustainability report. So it's not necessarily as transparent as a sustainability report, and it's extremely complex. This number, say you get a score of 86, is a really high number, but you may be talking about over 400. It's like over 400 categories that you can matrix in this thing, right? So and they're adding more and more all the time, and so it's maybe not necessarily something that's easily digestible. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. But I still think of trying to find out all the information behind that number has been kind of hard because it's proprietary information by these companies. Not going to give everything out, and it's so complex that you have to implement special software and have people dedicated to running these things a little bit as well, don't you? I mean, you have to have people that are really
a lot of resources involved with it. I think it takes a lot of time, money, and workforce and resources, and all those things you need to do just to set up the system you need to do the ESG reporting.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this. It costs a company about $500,000 just to implement it these days. A larger company may be a little more. And then there's a maintenance aspect and the specialists have to pay and the practices have to implement. That's not even factored into that cost that you have to pay out every year. And so there's a cost tail to it.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with when you set up these sustainability reporting, and that's all the information you need to help you do this ESG scoring from the different agencies. One thing that people don't realize is that in order to do this, you have to usually go by what are called ISO standards. It's from a company called the International Standard Organization. And so they were formed a while back ago, but what they set up these standards that provide as management systems for that company. So at a minimum, if you're going to do ESG, you have to set up a occupational health and safety management system, which is ISO 45001, a quality manufacturing management system, which is ISO 9001, and then you have kind of the more recent one, which is the environmental management system, which is 14001. And then you also have ones for the verification of your carbon footprint. So at minimum, you have all these standards that company has to do, and that's probably part of that cost he's talking about. But just to implement those standards, you have to invest in a lot of employees. So we were just kind of sitting down thinking about what number of employees you would need, and just off the top of our head, we were thinking that a company, in order to do this, would have to have like 35 or 40 or more employees. If we had those management systems, those would take probably about 3 to 5 employees each. You would have to have ones that have to deal with EPA environmental compliance. You have ones that look into workers' rights, equal opportunity, set up a company's social programs for your company that help them out and community things that you're doing for them. You would need employees for your greenhouse gas accounting and all that. To do things for you would need employees for your supply chain and procurement. Those would be several employees. You need ones to do life cycle analysis, several of those. The ones that work with your stakeholders, you would have to have like several of those, and then you'd have product labeling, so you need some of those. So the idea is that you have all these employees. It just kind of stacks up. And not only that, you would have to invest money for those resources that those employees can do to bring this forth and all that, you know. Well, we're saying that a lot. It's not mandatory right now. It's more of a voluntary effort from companies. So that's kind of which is good. But it may become an issue if companies that are publicly traded now have to do it. Is a mandatory requirement for them to set up these sustainability reports for their ESG reporting. That's where it could become an issue.
Yeah, you were talking about the SEC before. Maybe it has these policies they want to implement that would make it mandatory, and so they've been talking about this for quite a while, all this year anyway. And so if that happens, that to me, I think that may be a problem because it can be at the point where it is sort of trying to conform everybody into one box, and that may not be so easy for every company that doesn't have the same business model as another company or a different type of company to all play on this field that may advantage one company over another because of that. And so, for instance, we were talking about a manufacturing company versus maybe a production facility, right? So a manufacturer has to deal with acquiring materials, hazardous waste, chemicals, things like that. Whatever they're making, it may be a very complex process, and so they have to worry about all those things. Whereas maybe an assembly line doesn't have to worry about those things. And so maybe it's naturally easier for them to get a higher ESG score, but not for necessarily a company that doesn't have that same situation, even though they're working in the same business field. So.
And the perfect examples of this, I mean, we harp on this a lot, but is with the solar industry and the electric car industry. The companies that produce the batteries, they get their raw materials from an overseas company. The overseas companies that do it, they have, they may not have workers' rights the right way. They may be exploiting their people there, the indigenous people, to get those minerals. And they're depleting their resources. But this may not show up in your ESG score. Your company doesn't do those activities and stuff, so you're kind of more insulated from that. With solar panels, the same thing. Especially if you're just assembling the solar panels with the raw materials, the wafers and all that, the silicon wafers, you're not manufacturing those yourself, so you're not producing all those greenhouse gas emissions or putting the water or things like that with the manufacturer. So it kind of insulates more the companies that just assemble it, like you said, instead of the ones that are actually doing the manufacturing or giving you your raw materials for it. Right.